The woman who walked through the coffee shop door was supposed to be a stranger. She wasn't. Ethan Cole's hands went cold around his cup as recognition hit him like a physical blow. Claire Dawson, his former best friend's ex-wife, the one person in the world he had no right to be sitting across from. She froze mid-step, her face draining of color. Neither spoke. Neither moved. The setup had been innocent, a blind date arranged by well-meaning coworkers. But innocence shattered the moment their eyes met, and suddenly the past wasn't past anymore. If you want to see how a single moment can rewrite everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and moving forward, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The mountains outside Pine Ridge didn't care about human drama. They stood silent and eternal, wrapped in morning fog that clung to the valleys like old secrets refusing to dissipate. Ethan Cole had always found comfort in that indifference. At 26, he'd built a life that mirrored those mountains, solid, quiet, unbothered by the chaos that seemed to consume everyone else. His apartment was a study in intentional simplicity. No clutter, no noise. Just the essentials arranged with the precision of someone who'd learned that control over small things could substitute for control over the larger, messier parts of existence. Each morning began the same way. Coffee at 5:30, work boots laced by 6, and the drive to whatever construction site currently employed him completed in companionable silence with the truck radio off. Ethan preferred silence. It didn't ask questions. It didn't expect answers. "You're going," Marcus had said 3 days earlier, dropping a torn piece of paper with a name and number onto Ethan's lunch cooler. Marcus was the site foreman, 15 years older, with the kind of comfortable marriage that made him evangelical about fixing everyone else's solitude. "My wife's coworker. Nice woman. Quiet. You'll like her." "I'm fine," Ethan had replied, not looking up from the blueprint he'd been studying. "You're alone," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." Ethan had tried every polite refusal he could construct. When those failed, he tried impolite ones. But Marcus possessed the patient stubbornness of someone convinced he was performing an act of mercy, and eventually Ethan had surrendered simply because resistance required more energy than compliance, which was how he found himself on a Saturday morning that felt too bright and too warm for October, driving toward downtown Pine Ridge in a coffee shop he'd never entered. The place was called the Grounded Bean, one of those aggressively rustic establishments that tried too hard to look unstudied. Exposed brick, mismatched furniture, chalkboard menus written in that particular style of handwriting that took effort to appear effortless. Ethan arrived 15 minutes early, not because he was eager, but because showing up late felt like a statement he didn't want to make. He ordered black coffee, no modifications, no complications, and claimed a table near the window where he could watch the door. His palms were sweating. He wiped them on his jeans and wondered, not for the first time, what kind of person agreed to a blind date arranged by people who barely knew them. Probably the same kind who'd spent the last 4 years speaking to almost no one outside of work. 10 minutes before the agreed meeting time, the door opened. A woman entered, pausing just inside to scan the room. Ethan's heart did something strange and arrhythmic, a stumble step that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition so profound it felt like falling. Claire Dawson. The coffee cup in his hand became suddenly heavy. He set it down carefully, aware that his fingers had gone numb. This wasn't possible. Marcus's wife worked in medical billing at the regional hospital. Claire had been, a teacher. Or maybe she'd changed careers. People did that. People changed everything after their lives fell apart. She hadn't seen him yet. She was looking at her phone, checking something, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. 4 years had changed her in ways both subtle and significant. She was thinner, her movements more deliberate, as if she'd learned to take up less space in the world. But even from across the room, Ethan could see she carried herself differently now, straighter, more self-contained. Then she looked up. The recognition was mutual and instantaneous. Her face went through a series of expressions too quick to catalog individually. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been pain, and finally, a careful blankness that Ethan recognized because he felt his own features arranging themselves into the same practiced neutrality. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The coffee shop continued its business around them. Someone laughed at a nearby table. The espresso machine hissed. A barista called out a mobile order. Normal life proceeding as if the ground beneath two people hadn't just opened up into a chasm of history and complication. Claire recovered first. She walked toward him, each step deliberate, and Ethan stood because his mother had raised him with manners even if she hadn't managed to protect him from making catastrophically poor choices in friendship. "Ethan," she said when she reached the table. Her voice was quieter than he remembered, but steadier. "Claire." His own voice sounded strange to him, coming from somewhere outside his body. They stood there 2 feet apart, while the silence stretched between them like a wire drawn too tight. The obvious thing would be to laugh it off, to acknowledge the cosmic absurdity of the situation and retreat with dignity and tact. But Ethan had spent 4 years teaching himself not to run from uncomfortable things, and apparently that lesson had stuck even when running would be the wisest choice. "I didn't know," Claire said finally. "Marcus's wife, Jennifer, she just said she knew someone. She didn't mention a name." "Same," Ethan managed. "I told Marcus I wasn't interested. He insisted." Another silence. Claire's hands twisted around the strap of her purse, then deliberately stilled. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "That would probably be smart." Neither of them moved. "Do you want coffee?" The question came out of Ethan's mouth before his brain had authorized it. "I mean, you're here, we're here. It would be weird to just—" "Yes," Claire interrupted, and something in her voice suggested she was as surprised by the word as he was. "Coffee would be—" "Yes." She sat down. Ethan sat down. The wire between them didn't snap, but it stopped vibrating quite so dangerously. He watched as she set her purse on the empty chair beside her, buying herself time with small, unnecessary adjustments. When she finally looked at him directly, her eyes were the same soft brown he remembered, but there was something different in them now, a wariness that hadn't existed before, and under it, a kind of quiet strength he didn't recognize. "I'll get you something," Ethan said, standing again. "What do you want?" "Cappuccino. 1 sugar." She paused. "Please." He went to the counter, grateful for the temporary escape. His thoughts were a tangle he couldn't begin to sort through. Of all the people in Pine Ridge and the surrounding towns, of all the possible setups, how had this happened? The rational part of his brain knew it was simple probability, small town, interconnected social networks, blind chance. But it felt like something more deliberate, as if the universe had decided to confront him with precisely the situation he'd spent 4 years carefully avoiding. While waiting for the cappuccino, Ethan let himself really think about what he was doing. The smart move would be to make an excuse, leave some money for her drink, and get out. Call Marcus on Monday and explain that it hadn't worked out. Thanks anyway. Claire would do the same with Jennifer. They'd both retreat back into their separate, carefully constructed lives, and this moment would become just another uncomfortable memory to file away. But he didn't want to leave. That realization arrived with uncomfortable clarity. Whatever this was, guilt, curiosity, or something he wasn't ready to name, it was strong enough to override every self-protective instinct he'd developed. He returned to the table with her cappuccino and a refill of his own black coffee. Claire accepted the cup with a small nod of thanks, wrapping both hands around it as if she needed the warmth despite the mild weather. "So," she said after a moment, "this is awkward." "Aggressively awkward," Ethan agreed. The corner of her mouth lifted fractionally. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement that humor still existed somewhere in this situation. "How have you been?" It was such a normal question, so inadequate to the moment that Ethan almost laughed. "Fine," he said, then reconsidered. "Actually, that's not true. I've been existing, working, keeping to myself mostly." Claire nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." "You?" The question was safer than asking what he really wanted to know. How she'd survived, what the last 4 years had looked like from her side, whether she ever thought about the friendship that had imploded so spectacularly that it had taken chunks of multiple lives with it when it went. "I'm teaching at Pine Ridge Elementary now," she said. "3rd grade. I moved back about 2 years ago." Ethan absorbed this information. She'd been in town for 2 years, and they'd never crossed paths. Or maybe they had, and he simply hadn't noticed. He'd become excellent at not noticing things, at moving through the world with his attention carefully narrowed to only what was immediately necessary. You like it? Teaching here? I do. She took a sip of her cappuccino, and when she continued, her voice had relaxed fractionally. The kids are good, honest in a way adults forget how to be. They don't care about your history. They just want to know if you're fair and if you'll help them reach the high shelf in the art closet. Sounds peaceful. It is. She met his eyes directly. I needed peaceful. The unspoken context hung between them, what she'd needed peace from, what had made peace necessary. Ryan, the divorce, the explosion of a marriage and a friendship group that had left everyone damaged in different ways. Ethan looked down at his coffee. Claire, I should have said something. After. I should have called or don't. Her voice was quiet but firm. We don't need to do that. Not now. Maybe not ever. He looked up, surprised by the certainty in her tone. What happened? Happened, Claire continued. I've spent a lot of time in therapy working through it. One thing I learned is that rehashing every moment, every choice, every person who could have done something different, it doesn't help. It just keeps you stuck. Therapy helped? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Immensely. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Turns out, when your marriage falls apart because your husband cheated with your sister, and then your entire social circle takes sides like it's a war, you accumulate some things to process. The casual way she said it, the affair with her sister, the social fallout, stunned Ethan into silence. He'd known the broad strokes, everyone had, but hearing it from her, delivered with such hard-won calm, made it real in a way gossip never had. I didn't know you knew, she added, reading his expression. About the sister part, Ryan told people it was just someone else. I guess he thought it sounded less terrible. I knew, Ethan admitted quietly. Ryan told me, right before I told him we were done. Claire's eyebrows rose slightly. You ended the friendship? Yeah. Ethan rotated his coffee cup slowly, watching the dark liquid swirl. He wanted me to understand his side. Kept saying you'd become distant, that the marriage was dead anyway, that he'd found real connection with someone who actually saw him. I listened for about 10 minutes, and then I told him he was full of shit, and I was out. I didn't know that, Claire said softly. I thought, everyone took his side. I assumed you had too. No. The word came out harder than he intended. I didn't choose sides. I chose to be done with all of it. Moved to the outskirts, took the construction job, stopped answering calls. I know that's not noble. I know it probably made things harder for you, having people just vanish. It did, Claire interrupted, but her tone wasn't accusatory. But I also understand it. Staying neutral in someone else's war doesn't feel neutral to the person fighting it. It feels like abandonment. I'm sorry. I know. She took another sip of coffee. And I forgive you, if that matters. Though honestly, you were probably the smart one. Everyone who stayed in it just prolonged the damage. They fell silent again, but it was different now, less fraught. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by something more complicated, a tentative recognition that they were both different people than they'd been 4 years ago, shaped by the same disaster, but emerging from it on separate paths. Can I ask you something? Claire said after a while. Sure. Why did you agree to this? The blind date. Marcus told Jennifer you were resistant. Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. Because Marcus wouldn't let it go. He's got this idea that I'm wasting my life being alone, that I need to put myself out there. He made air quotes around the phrase. Eventually it was easier to agree than keep arguing. So you weren't looking to meet someone? No. He paused, considering honesty. I haven't dated anyone since 4 years ago. There was someone briefly, but I wasn't in any shape for it, and she figured that out faster than I did. After that, I just stopped trying. Claire nodded slowly. I dated a little. Therapy homework, essentially. My therapist said I needed to prove to myself I could trust people again. So I went on apps, met some perfectly nice men, and felt absolutely nothing for any of them. She smiled wryly. Turns out you can't force connection just because you're theoretically ready for it. No, Ethan agreed. You can't. Another silence, but this one felt almost comfortable. Outside the window, Pine Ridge continued its Saturday morning routine. People walked dogs. Couples strolled hand in hand, life, mundane and ongoing, indifferent to the small revolution happening at a corner table in the grounded bean. "What do we do now?" Claire asked finally. It was the question Ethan had been avoiding thinking about directly. The smart answer was obvious. Finish their coffees politely, acknowledge the strangeness of the situation, and go their separate ways. Let this become an anecdote, strange but ultimately meaningless. But sitting across from her, watching the way sunlight caught in her dark hair, seeing the evidence of hard-won peace in her expression, Ethan found he didn't want the smart answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "What do you want to do?" Claire was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. When she spoke, her voice was careful but clear. "This is probably a terrible idea." "Probably," Ethan agreed. "There's history, complications, people who wouldn't understand." "All true. But I'm enjoying talking to you." She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "More than I've enjoyed talking to anyone in a long time. And that feels important, even if it's inconvenient." Something in Ethan's chest loosened, a tension he hadn't known he was carrying. "Same," he said quietly. "So maybe," Claire hesitated, "maybe we could just see? Not make any big decisions right now, just have coffee, talk. See if this feeling holds up outside of the shock of the situation." "You mean see each other again?" "If you want to." She held his gaze steadily. No pressure, no expectations, just honest. Ethan considered it. Every rational part of his brain was listing reasons why this was a bad idea. Claire was Ryan's ex-wife. Ryan, who had been his best friend from age 12 to 22. Ryan, who would lose his mind if he knew about this conversation. The social complications alone would be Byzantine. But Ryan had made his choices 4 years ago. He'd chosen to betray Claire in the most devastating way possible. He'd chosen to justify it, to play victim, to expect Ethan's understanding and support. And Ethan had chosen to walk away from all of it, from Ryan, from the friend group, from the entire toxic situation. He'd walked away to protect himself, to avoid taking sides in something that felt impossible to navigate. But in doing so, he'd also walked away from Claire, who had deserved better from everyone involved. Maybe this was a chance to make a different choice. "Okay," Ethan said. "Let's see." Claire's smile was small but genuine. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He felt his own mouth curve upward, unfamiliar muscles engaging. "But we should probably be clear about what this is. We're two people having coffee, getting to know each other again, or maybe for the first time since we never really talked much before." Agreed. Claire's shoulders relaxed fractionally. No drama, no rushing, just present tense. "Present tense," Ethan repeated. He liked that. It suggested putting the past in its proper place, acknowledged but not controlling. They talked for another hour. Small things at first. Claire's students, Ethan's current construction project, the way Pine Ridge had changed and stayed the same. But gradually the conversation deepened, became more personal. Claire talked about therapy, about learning to trust her own judgment again after having it so thoroughly undermined. Ethan talked about the isolation he'd chosen, how it had felt safe at first but had started to feel more like a trap. "I forgot how to be around people," he admitted. "Like, I can do surface level fine, work conversations, transaction stuff, but anything deeper, and I just blank, like I lost the skill." "You're doing okay right now," Claire observed. "This feels different." Ethan struggled to articulate it. "Maybe because we're starting from such a weird place. There's no pretending, no trying to make a good impression. We've already seen each other's worst context." "That's oddly freeing," Claire said. "No performance required." "Exactly." When they finally left the coffee shop, the sun was high and warm. They stood on the sidewalk, that awkward moment where good intentions met practical reality. "So," Claire said, "how do we do this? Exchange numbers like normal people?" "I think that's traditional." Ethan pulled out his phone, a basic model he used mostly for work calls. "Fair warning, I'm not great at texting." "Fair warning accepted." Claire recited her number, waited while he saved it. "And I'm probably going to overthink every message before I send it." "That makes 2 of us." She smiled at that, then hesitated. "Ethan, thank you for not running. I know this has to be weird for you too." "Weird doesn't begin to cover it," he said honestly. But I'm glad I stayed. Me too. They said goodbye with an awkwardness that felt appropriate. No hug, no handshake, just a small wave and mutual acknowledgement that they'd both just stepped into something undefined and potentially complicated. Ethan drove home with his thoughts in unusual disarray. The mountains watched him pass, indifferent as always, but for once their silence didn't feel comforting. It felt isolating in a way he was suddenly less willing to accept. His apartment, when he entered it, felt smaller than it had that morning. The careful order he'd imposed on everything looked less like discipline and more like avoidance. He stood in the center of his living room, minimal furniture, no personal photos, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived there rather than just occupied space, and let himself feel the full weight of the last 4 years. He'd called it healing. He'd called it moving on. But standing there, fresh from 2 hours of conversation that had felt more alive than anything in recent memory, Ethan had to confront the possibility that he'd just been hiding. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Claire. Just wanted to make sure the number worked. No pressure to respond now. Hope you have a good rest of your day." Ethan stared at the message for a long moment. Then, moving slowly as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile, he typed back, "Got it. You too." He hit send before he could second-guess the brevity, then immediately worried it was too short, too cold. But a moment later, another message arrived. "Perfect. Talk soon." And somehow those 2 words settled something in him. This was real. This was happening. Whatever this was. The rest of Saturday passed in unusual restlessness. Ethan tried to occupy himself with normal weekend tasks, laundry, meal prep, maintenance on his truck, but his mind kept drifting back to the coffee shop, to Claire's steady voice, to the way she'd looked when she'd said she was enjoying talking to him. Sunday was worse. He found himself checking his phone more often than made sense, not necessarily expecting a message, but hoping for one anyway. When it came, mid-afternoon, his heart did that strange arrhythmic thing again. Random question, "Do you still hike? I remember you used to talk about the trails around here." Ethan looked at the message for a long moment before responding. She remembered that. They'd never hiked together, had barely had one-on-one conversations in the old days, but apparently she'd paid more attention than he'd realized. "Yeah, most weekends. You interested?" The response came quickly. "Very. I need to get out more. Therapy homework. Next Saturday? I know a trail that's not too crowded. Good views. That sounds perfect." They texted logistics, meeting time, what to bring, appropriate shoes, and Ethan found himself smiling at the screen like an idiot. This was absurd. He was 26 years old, arranging a hike like it was a covert operation, feeling nervous about seeing someone he'd just spent 2 hours with yesterday. But it also felt good. Natural. Like something in him that had been locked down tight was finally starting to loosen. The week crawled by. Work was work. Framing on a new development, repetitive and physically demanding in a way Ethan usually appreciated. But his mind wasn't in it the way it normally was. Marcus noticed. "You doing okay?" the foreman asked Wednesday afternoon, watching as Ethan measured the same board for the 3rd time. "Fine," Ethan said. "Just distracted." Marcus's eyes lit up with entirely too much knowing. "The date went well?" Ethan hesitated. The truth was complicated. The simple answer was easier. Yeah, it was good." "Seeing her again?" "Saturday." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, hard enough to make Ethan stumble. "There you go. I told you Jennifer knows people. Good people." "Right." Ethan didn't elaborate. There was no way to explain the situation without opening conversations he had no intention of having. Let Marcus think it was a simple success story. Let everyone think whatever they wanted. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made mountain living worthwhile. Cool morning air, brilliant sunshine, leaves just starting to turn gold at the edges. Ethan arrived at the trailhead early, his truck one of only 2 in the small lot. The other vehicle he didn't recognize. Claire pulled in exactly on time, driving a sensible sedan that matched her practical approach to most things. She got out wearing hiking boots that had clearly seen use, athletic pants, and a light jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, completely comfortable in her own skin. "Morning," she said, smiling as she approached. "Perfect day for this." "Best time of year," Ethan agreed. "Before it gets too cold, but after the summer crowds thin out." They started up the trail, falling into an easy pace. For the first 20 minutes, they didn't talk much, just moved through the forest in companionable quiet. Ethan had forgotten how good this felt, sharing space with someone without the pressure of constant conversation. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said eventually as the trail began to climb more steeply. "Sure. Do you think about it much? What happened?" Ethan knew what she meant without clarification. "Sometimes. Less now than I used to. Mostly I think about how I handled it, whether I should have done things differently." "Like what?" "Like checking on you, or telling Ryan off harder, or not disappearing quite so completely." He paused to let her navigate a rocky section, then continued. "I told myself I was staying neutral, but really, I was just protecting myself." "You weren't obligated to do more," Claire said. "You weren't my friend. Not really. We knew each other through Ryan, but we didn't have our own relationship." "No," Ethan agreed. "But I knew what he'd done was wrong. That should have been enough to at least reach out." "Maybe." Claire was quiet for a moment, her breathing steady despite the climb. "But I also understand the impulse to just get away from all of it. The whole situation was toxic. Everyone who stayed in proximity got poisoned by it in one way or another." "You didn't get to leave, though." "No," she said quietly. "I was stuck right in the center of it, but I survived. And eventually I got to leave too, in my own way. Moving back here, starting over, building something separate from all that history." They reached a viewpoint and paused, both breathing harder from the elevation gain. The valley spread out below them, Pine Ridge visible as a small cluster of buildings in the distance. The mountains rising on all sides in layers of blue and gray and green. "It's beautiful up here," Claire said softly. "Yeah." Ethan watched her take in the view, saw genuine peace in her expression. "You seem different from before." "I am different." She turned to look at him. "I had to be. The person I was before. She let things happen to her. She ignored warning signs. She prioritized being agreeable over being honest. That person couldn't survive what happened." "So you changed." "I grew up," Claire corrected. "Finally. At 30, which is embarrassingly late, but better late than never." She smiled wryly. "One thing therapy teaches you is that you can't control what other people do. You can only control how you respond and who you choose to become in the aftermath." "And who did you choose to become?" "Someone who doesn't shrink," she said firmly. "Someone who takes up her full space in the world. Someone who says what she means and means what she says." Ethan nodded slowly. "I like that person." "Good." Claire's smile was genuine. "Because she likes you too." They continued up the trail, the conversation flowing more easily now. Claire told him about her students, about the small triumphs and frustrations of teaching 8-year-olds. Ethan talked about construction, about the satisfaction of building something tangible, of seeing empty lots transform into structures that would house families and memories. "Do you want to do it forever?" Claire asked. "Construction?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "I'm good at it. It pays okay. But I never really chose it intentionally. It was just what was available when I needed to start over." "What would you choose? If you could do anything?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years. He'd stopped asking himself. "I used to think about architecture," he said slowly. "Designing buildings rather than just putting them together. But that would mean school, and I'm already behind, and the money—" "Those are obstacles," Claire interrupted gently. "Not answers. What would you choose?" Ethan considered it seriously. "Yeah," he said finally. "Architecture. Something about creating spaces that work for how people actually live. Not just functional, but thoughtful." "That's a good dream." "It's impractical." "Most good dreams are." Claire stopped walking, turned to face him. "But impractical isn't the same as impossible. You're 26. You have time." Says the woman who went back to school for teaching. "Exactly." Her eyes were warm. "I know what it's like to rebuild from scratch. It's terrifying and exhausting and absolutely worth it." They stood there, face to face on the trail, and Ethan felt something shift between them. This wasn't just two people being friendly. This was connection, real and deepening, the kind that couldn't be forced or faked. Claire, he started, then stopped, not sure how to articulate what he was feeling. I know, she said softly. I feel it too. This is complicated. Very. People are going to have opinions. Probably. She didn't look away. Does that change anything for you? Ethan thought about it honestly. Ryan would be furious. The old friend group, most of whom he'd lost contact with anyway, would have thoughts. People in town would gossip. It would be messy and uncomfortable and potentially painful. But standing there, looking at Claire in the mountain sunshine, feeling more present and alive than he had in years, Ethan found that the potential complications mattered less than he'd expected. No, he said, it doesn't change anything. Claire's smile was like sunrise. Good, she said, because I don't want to stop this, whatever this is. Neither do I. They continued hiking, but something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer two people cautiously exploring a possibility. They were two people who'd made a choice, however tentative, to move toward each other despite the obstacles. The conversation turned lighter after that. Shared observations about nature, terrible puns about trail names, comfortable silences punctuated by easy laughter. By the time they reached the summit, Ethan felt like he'd known Claire for years, not just a week. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley, sharing water and granola bars in comfortable quiet. Can I tell you something? Claire said after a while. Of course. When I walked into that coffee shop and saw you, my first thought was to run. Just turn around and leave and pretend it never happened. Why didn't you? Because my second thought was that maybe this was exactly what was supposed to happen. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. I don't believe in fate or anything, but I do believe in paying attention when something unexpected shows up and demands to be noticed. And this, you, demanded to be noticed. Ethan felt the weight of that admission, the trust it represented. I almost left too, he confessed, even after you sat down. I kept thinking this was a mistake, that we should both just walk away. What changed your mind? You did. He looked at her directly. The way you talked about therapy, about choosing who to become, the way you weren't hiding from anything. I realized I'd been hiding for 4 years, and maybe it was time to stop. So we're both taking risks here. Yeah, Ethan agreed. We are. They stayed on the summit for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. By the time they started the descent, the sun was angling toward afternoon, painting everything in golden light. At the trailhead, neither of them seemed ready to part ways. This might be forward, Claire said, but do you want to get lunch? There's a place in town that does amazing sandwiches. I'd like that, Ethan said immediately. They drove separately but met at a small deli near the center of Pine Ridge. It was busy with weekend crowds, which meant they had to share a small table near the window, sitting closer than strictly necessary. Ethan found he didn't mind. Over sandwiches, the conversation continued its easy flow. They discovered shared tastes in music, divergent opinions on movies, and a mutual appreciation for silence that didn't need filling. I should probably tell you something, Claire said as they were finishing their meal. Jennifer's been asking me how the date went. She's very invested in her matchmaking success. Ethan grimaced. Marcus, too. He's been insufferable at work. What did you tell her? The truth, mostly. That we hit it off. That we're seeing each other again. She paused. I didn't mention the history. Smart, Ethan said. Marcus would probably combust from the gossip potential. But we should probably figure out what we're doing, Claire continued, before someone figures it out for us. What do you mean? I mean, do we tell people? Do we keep this quiet? Do we have a conversation about what this even is before we worry about who knows? Ethan appreciated her directness. I think we should be honest, he said slowly. Not broadcast it, but not hide either. And as for what this is, he met her eyes. I'd like to keep seeing you, regularly, intentionally, see where it goes. Like dating, Claire said. Yeah, like dating. Her smile was soft but certain. I'd like that too. They agreed to take things slowly, to be honest with each other, and to deal with complications as they arose rather than borrowing trouble from the future. It felt adult and reasonable and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. Walking Claire to her car, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. The mountains still rose around them, indifferent and eternal, but they no longer felt isolating. They felt like home in a way they hadn't before. Same time next week? Claire asked as she unlocked her car. Definitely. Ethan paused, then made a choice. Or sooner if you want. We could do dinner. Wednesday, maybe. Wednesday works. She was smiling fully now, no guardedness left. Text me? I will. She drove away, and Ethan stood in the parking lot watching until her car disappeared around a corner. Then he got in his truck and sat there for a moment, just breathing, just being present with the realization that his carefully controlled life had just been thoroughly disrupted. And for the first time in 4 years, that disruption felt like possibility rather than threat. Wednesday arrived wrapped in the kind of cold rain that made the mountains disappear into gray mist. Ethan spent the day working on an interior renovation project, grateful to be out of the weather but distracted by the clock. He'd suggested dinner at 6. Claire had agreed. Now, with 3 hours to go, he was second-guessing everything from the restaurant choice to whether he should have offered to pick her up instead of meeting there. "You're doing it again," Marcus said, appearing beside him with a level and a knowing look. "Doing what?" "Measuring that same wall section for the 4th time. Either you've forgotten how numbers work or your head's somewhere else." Marcus grinned. "Let me guess, seeing her tonight?" Ethan didn't bother denying it. "Yeah, dinner." "That's what, 3rd time you've gotten together?" "Something like that." Ethan moved to a different section of wall, determined to actually accomplish something before the day ended. "Jennifer's thrilled, by the way. Says her coworker seems really happy." Marcus paused. "Didn't catch her name, though. Jennifer's weirdly secretive about it." Ethan's hand stilled on the tape measure. Of course, Jennifer wouldn't have mentioned Claire's name to Marcus. She probably knew exactly who Claire was, small-town dynamics being what they were, and was carefully avoiding connections that might complicate the narrative. It was a kindness, actually, buying them time to figure things out before the inevitable revelation. "She's private," Ethan said carefully. "I respect that." "Fair enough." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Just good to see you engaging with life again, you know? You've been a ghost for too long." After Marcus wandered off, Ethan stood there thinking about that word. Ghost. It was accurate in ways that made him uncomfortable. He'd been haunting his own life for 4 years, present but not participating, visible but not seen. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time Ethan left work. He drove home, showered, changed into clothes that weren't work-stained, and found himself standing in front of his closet having an internal debate about whether a button-down was too formal for a casual dinner. He settled on a dark Henley that split the difference, then felt ridiculous for caring this much. The restaurant was a newer place on the edge of town, Italian-influenced but casual, the kind of spot where you could have a real conversation without shouting over noise. Ethan arrived first and got them a table near the back, away from the main traffic flow. His palms were sweating again. He wiped them on his jeans and wondered when he'd become this person. Nervous, uncertain, hoping. Claire walked in right on time, shaking rain from her dark hair. She'd changed from whatever she wore to teach, now in jeans and a deep green sweater that made her eyes look almost luminous. When she spotted him, her smile was immediate and genuine, and something in Ethan's chest settled. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Sorry I'm damp. The rain picked up again." "You look fine." The words came out more intense than he'd intended, but Claire's smile only widened. "You clean up nice yourself. Very different from hiking gear." "I'm versatile," Ethan said, and she laughed, the sound warm and unselfconscious. They ordered wine, something neither of them did often, but it felt appropriate for the moment, and settled into the kind of conversation that had become familiar over the past week. Claire talked about a student who'd finally grasped long division after weeks of struggle, the triumph in her voice making something so simple feel monumental. Ethan talked about the renovation project, about the satisfaction of restoring old craftsmanship rather than just slapping up new construction. "You really love the work," Claire observed, "even if it's not your dream." "I do," Ethan admitted. "There's something honest about it. You can see what you've accomplished at the end of the day. It's concrete. Unlike teaching, where you plant seeds and hope something grows but might not see the results for years," Claire said. "If ever." "That sounds frustrating." "It can be." She took a sip of wine. "But it's also beautiful when you do see it. When a kid who struggled all year suddenly gets it, and you can see their whole world expand right in front of you. Those moments make everything else worth it." The food arrived, pasta for Claire, chicken for Ethan, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation around them, other people's lives intersecting briefly in shared space before diverging again. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ethan said after a while. "Of course. Do you ever hear from him? Ryan?" Claire's expression shifted, became more guarded. "Sometimes. He texts every few months, usually late at night, usually saying he's sorry, that he made mistakes, that he wants to talk." "Do you respond?" "No." The word was firm. "I did at first, right after the divorce. I thought we needed closure or whatever. But talking to him just reopened wounds, so now I delete the messages and move on." "Does he know you're back in Pine Ridge?" "I don't know. Probably. It's not exactly a metropolis." She set down her fork, met his eyes directly. "Does it bother you? That I'm bringing this history into whatever we're doing?" "No," Ethan said honestly. "I mean, it's there. We can't pretend it's not. But you're not your history. Neither am I." "That's very evolved of you." "Don't give me too much credit. I'm mostly making this up as I go." He paused. "But I do think we get to decide what matters. And Ryan's opinion doesn't matter to me anymore. Hasn't for a long time." Claire nodded slowly. "He's going to find out eventually. About us." "Probably. And when he does, it won't be pretty." "No," Ethan agreed. "It won't." They sat with that reality for a moment. The wine had warmed Ethan from the inside, loosening some of the perpetual tension he carried. Or maybe that was just Claire's presence, the way she made honesty feel safe instead of dangerous. "I don't want to hide," Claire said finally. "I spent too much of my marriage hiding things, my unhappiness, my doubts, my growing certainty that something was deeply wrong. I won't do that again. I'm not asking you to." "Good." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief but deliberate. "Because I really like you, Ethan, and I want to see where this goes without apology." "I really like you too." The words felt massive, weighted with implications he wasn't ready to fully examine. "And I agree. No hiding." They finished dinner slowly, neither in a hurry to end the evening. The conversation ranged widely. Childhood memories, embarrassing stories, dreams deferred, and dreams reimagined. Claire told him about her sister, about the complicated grief of losing someone who'd betrayed you so thoroughly. "I haven't spoken to her since the divorce," Claire said quietly. "She tried to reach out a few times, saying she was sorry, that it just happened, all the usual justifications. But how do you come back from that? Your sister and your husband. It's not just betrayal, it's a fundamental rewriting of your whole family narrative." "You don't have to come back from it," Ethan said. "Some things break permanently. That's okay. Therapy says I should forgive for my own peace. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You can forgive and still choose to never speak to her again." Claire looked at him with something like gratitude. "That's exactly what I needed to hear. Everyone else acts like I'm being cruel, holding a grudge. But it's not about punishment. It's about protection." "Then protect yourself," Ethan said firmly. "You don't owe anyone access to your life, especially people who've proven they'll hurt you." "Speaking from experience?" "Yeah." Ethan thought about Ryan, about the texts he'd received over the years that he'd never answered. "I used to think cutting people off was weak. Like, if you were strong enough, you could maintain relationships through anything. But that's bullshit. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away." "And stay away," Claire added. "Exactly." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under streetlights. They walked to their cars slowly, neither quite ready to part ways. The parking lot was nearly empty, the evening crowd having dispersed. "I don't want this to end," Claire said, stopping beside her sedan. "It doesn't have to." Ethan made a decision. "Come back to my place. Just for coffee. Just to keep talking. If you want." She studied his face for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "But I'm driving myself. I don't want to assume—" "I'm not assuming anything," Ethan interrupted gently. "Just coffee. Just more time." "Then, yes, I'd like that." Ethan's apartment felt different with Claire in it. She stood in the center of his living room, taking in the sparse furniture, the bare walls, the complete absence of personal touches. He saw it through her eyes and felt suddenly self-conscious about how little of himself he'd allowed to exist in this space. It's very... Claire searched for a diplomatic word. Empty, Ethan supplied. You can say it. I know what it looks like. I was going to say minimalist, but yes, empty works too. She turned to face him. Do you have anything? Photos, mementos? Anything that's yours rather than just functional? No. The admission felt like exposure. I got rid of everything when I moved here. Fresh start and all that. That's not a fresh start, Ethan. That's erasure. Her voice was gentle but honest. You can't build something new if you're standing on scorched earth. He didn't have a response to that. Instead, he moved to the small kitchen, started making coffee with hands that had gone slightly unsteady. Claire followed, leaning against the counter, watching him work. I'm not judging, she said after a moment. I get it. After the divorce, I threw out everything that reminded me of Ryan. Photos, gifts, even furniture we'd bought together. I wanted to burn it all to the ground. Did you? Most of it. Then my therapist pointed out I was also erasing good memories, times when I'd been happy even if the relationship was flawed. She suggested I was allowed to keep the parts of my history that belonged to me, not just the parts that involved him. Did that help? Eventually. Claire accepted the coffee mug he handed her. I have photos now, of my parents, of friends from college, of places I've traveled. They don't have Ryan in them, but they have me, and I'm worth remembering. Ethan absorbed that. He couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at an old photo, the last time he'd let himself think about who he'd been before everything fell apart. It felt dangerous, like opening a door to a room full of things that might hurt him. I don't know if I'm there yet, he said honestly. That's okay. You don't have to be. Claire moved to the living room, settled on his couch. But maybe think about it. About what you want to keep from your past, even if you're building a different future. He joined her on the couch, leaving appropriate distance between them. They drank coffee and talked about lighter things. Favorite books, worst jobs, the peculiar characters that populated small towns. The conversation flowed as easily as it had all evening, punctuated by comfortable silences that didn't need filling. I should probably go, Claire said eventually, though she made no move to stand. It's late and we both have work tomorrow. Probably, Ethan agreed, equally motionless. She turned to look at him, her expression serious. This is real, isn't it? Not just two lonely people finding comfort? It's real, Ethan said without hesitation. At least it is for me. For me too. She set down her empty mug. Which is terrifying because we both know how complicated this could get. Yeah, but I don't want to stop. Neither do I. Claire stood and Ethan walked her to the door. They stood in the threshold, the cool night air drifting in around them. Thank you for tonight, Claire said. For dinner and coffee and honesty. Thank you for coming, for staying. She reached up, her hand cupping his face briefly, her thumb brushing his cheek. The gesture was intimate and careful, a question and an answer all at once. Then she pulled back, smiled, and walked to her car. Ethan stood in the doorway until her taillights disappeared, then returned to his empty apartment that felt somehow less empty now. He looked around at the bare walls, the functional furniture, the complete absence of personality, and wondered if Claire was right, if he'd been erasing himself rather than starting fresh. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Ethan and Claire saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, dinners, walks, quiet evenings at one apartment or the other. They talked about everything, learning each other's rhythms and habits, the small details that made someone knowable. Claire was a morning person who woke energized and ready to engage with the world. Ethan was not, requiring coffee and silence before he could form coherent thoughts. Claire cooked elaborately on weekends, treating meal preparation like a creative project. Ethan existed on simple proteins and vegetables, viewing food as fuel more than experience. Claire kept her apartment warm and filled with plants and soft lighting. Ethan kept his apartment sparse and cool, still unable to fully inhabit the space. But the differences felt complementary rather than conflicting. Claire's warmth drew Ethan out of his habitual reserve. His steadiness gave her a foundation she hadn't realized she'd been missing. They balanced each other in ways that felt natural, unforced. I told Jennifer, Claire said one evening as they sat in her living room, a marked contrast to his with its comfortable furniture, bookshelves, framed prints on the walls. About us. Ethan looked up from the book he'd been pretending to read. How'd she react? She was surprised. Happy, but surprised. Claire set aside her own book. She knows who you are, knows the history. She was worried at first, asked if I was sure I knew what I was doing. And what did you tell her? That I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm doing it anyway. Claire smiled. She appreciated the honesty, said she wouldn't tell Marcus yet, give us time to figure out how we want to handle that. That's generous of her. She's a good friend. Claire pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture Ethan had come to recognize as her thinking pose. But we can't keep this quiet forever. Eventually people are going to see us together, put the pieces together. I know. Ethan closed his book, giving her his full attention. Are you worried about what people will say? A little. Small town, big opinions, you know how it is. She paused. But mostly, I'm worried about Ryan finding out before we're ready to deal with it. What does ready look like? I don't know, Claire admitted. Maybe there's no such thing as ready for that particular storm. Ethan moved closer, not touching, but present. We could tell him, proactively, take away the element of discovery. You'd be willing to do that? I'd rather control the narrative than let him create one for us. Ethan had been thinking about this, about the inevitable confrontation. He's going to find out. Better if we're the ones who tell him, on our terms. Claire considered this. That would require me to actually talk to him, which I've been successfully avoiding for 2 years. You don't have to. I could do it. No. The word was firm. If we do this, we do it together. I'm not letting you take that hit alone. It won't be pleasant. No, Claire agreed. It won't, but neither is waiting for the other shoe to drop. They sat with that decision, the weight of it settling between them. Outside, the first real snow of the season was beginning to fall, fat flakes catching in the streetlights. Winter was coming to the mountains, and with it, the understanding that their careful bubble of privacy was about to burst. Not yet, though, Claire said quietly. Let's have a little more time. Just us, before we have to deal with everyone else's reactions. Okay, Ethan agreed, but soon. Soon, she echoed. The snow continued through the night and into the next day, transforming Pine Ridge into something softer and quieter. Ethan worked half a day on the interior project, then left when the weather made the roads treacherous. He texted Claire to make sure she'd gotten home safely from school. Her response came quickly. Home and warm, come over if you want. He went because increasingly that was what he wanted. To be where she was, to share space and time, to build something that felt like foundation rather than scaffolding. Claire answered the door in sweats and thick socks, her hair loose around her shoulders. I made soup, she said. Probably too much. Want some? They ate at her small dining table, the soup rich and warming, perfect for the weather. Conversation flowed as it always did now, easy and ranging. But underneath, Ethan could feel the tension building. The reality they'd been avoiding was approaching, deadline growing nearer. I saw him, Claire said suddenly, setting down her spoon. Ryan, yesterday, at the grocery store. Ethan's hand tightened on his own spoon. Did he see you? I don't think so. I was in the next aisle over. I heard his voice, and I just froze. Like all my therapy and growth just evaporated, and I was back to being the person who couldn't stand up for herself. But you didn't talk to him. No. I left my cart and walked out. Sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. She looked at him, eyes bright with frustration. I was so angry at myself, for running, for being afraid, for letting him still have that power. Fear isn't weakness, Ethan said quietly. It's information. You weren't ready for that encounter, so you removed yourself. That's smart, not weak. You always do that. What? Reframe things so I don't feel terrible about myself. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Thank you. I'm just being honest. Ethan turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. You're one of the strongest people I know, Claire. The fact that you're still standing after everything you've been through, that's not weakness. That's steel. Steel can still bend, though. Bend, yes, Break? No. He squeezed her hand gently. And you haven't broken. You're here. You're building a life. You're letting yourself take risks again. That's all strength. Claire stood, came around the table, and did something she'd never done before. She kissed him. It was brief, chaste, just a press of lips, but it felt monumental. When she pulled back, her eyes were searching his face. Was that okay? She asked quietly. Very okay, Ethan managed. His heart was doing that arrhythmic thing again, the world narrowing to just her face, her proximity, the warmth of her hand still in his. I've wanted to do that for weeks, Claire admitted, but I wasn't sure if you... He kissed her back, cutting off the uncertainty. This kiss lasted longer, deepened, became something that spoke of want and possibility, and the particular courage it took to start over with someone new. When they finally separated, both breathing harder, Claire smiled. We should probably talk about what this means, she said. Probably. Ethan pulled her closer, until she was standing between his knees, his hands on her waist. But maybe we could just feel it for a while first, before we analyze it to death? I can do that. She rested her forehead against his. For the record, though, I'm all in. Whatever this is, I want it. Me too. They stayed like that for a long moment, just breathing together, present in the simplicity of connection. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in white, making the familiar world strange and new. Later, they moved to the couch, Claire curled against Ethan's side in a way that felt both natural and revolutionary. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The television played something neither was really watching. The warmth of her apartment, the softness of her against him, the quiet contentment of the moment. It was enough. I should go, Ethan said eventually, though he made no move to leave. You could stay, Claire said quietly. I have a guest room, or you could share my bed. Nothing has to happen. I like having you here. I like being here. He kissed the top of her head. But I should go home. We're still figuring this out. I don't want to rush. Since when are you the voice of restraint? But she was smiling. Since I realized how much I don't want to mess this up. He shifted, turning to look at her directly. You're important to me, Claire. More important than I expected. I want to do this right. There's no right way. Just our way. Then our way includes taking time, being sure. He stood reluctantly. But I'll see you this weekend? Saturday, she confirmed, and probably texting embarrassingly often before then. I'm counting on it. They stood at her door, the goodbye prolonged by neither wanting it to end. Finally, Ethan made himself leave, driving home through snow-quiet streets with his thoughts full of Claire, her laugh, her strength, the way she'd kissed him like it was both the easiest and bravest thing she'd ever done. His apartment felt especially empty when he entered it. Ethan stood in the center of his living room, looked at the bare walls, and made a decision. He pulled out his phone, scrolled back through years of avoided storage, and found what he was looking for. A photo from before. Before Ryan's betrayal. Before the implosion. Before he'd taught himself to exist in a world with no connections. It was a picture from a hiking trip, Ethan at 20, standing on a mountain summit with his arms spread wide, joy written across his face. He looked at that younger version of himself, so certain, so open, so undefended, and felt something shift. He wasn't that person anymore. But maybe he didn't have to be the opposite either. Maybe there was space between naive openness and complete closure. Maybe Claire was right, and he was allowed to keep the parts of his history that belonged to him alone. The next morning, Ethan stopped at a store on his way to work and bought a single frame. That night, he printed the hiking photo and hung it on his living room wall. It looked strange there, lonely in all that empty space. But it was a start. The photograph on Ethan's wall became a conversation starter when Claire visited the following weekend. She stood in front of it, studying the younger version of him frozen in that moment of unguarded joy. How old were you here? She asked. 20? Right before everything went sideways. Ethan came to stand beside her, looking at his past self with a mixture of recognition and distance. That was actually the last trip Ryan and I took together. 3 months later, he met your sister at some party, and within a year, everything had imploded. Claire was quiet for a moment. Do you miss him? The friendship, I mean. Not who he became, but who he was before. Sometimes, Ethan admitted. Not the person he turned out to be, but the person I thought he was. We grew up together. He knew me before I had to build all these walls. He gestured vaguely at the sparse apartment. But I think maybe I was wrong about who he was all along. Maybe the betrayal wasn't out of character. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention. Or maybe people change, Claire said softly. Maybe he was a good friend once and then he wasn't. Both things can be true. Is that what therapy teaches you? That people are complicated? Therapy teaches you that holding on to contradictions is okay, that you can miss someone and also be glad they're gone, that you can have good memories of a terrible relationship. She turned to face him. It's not all or nothing. Life's messier than that. Ethan pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. When did you get so wise? When I paid someone $150 an hour to help me stop being so stupid. But she was smiling, her arms wrapping around his waist. Speaking of which, I have a question. Shoot. Do you want to meet my therapist? Ethan pulled back to look at her. Like, together? Couples therapy? No, nothing that formal. She just mentioned that sometimes it helps for her to meet the people in her clients' lives. Get a fuller picture. And since you're becoming a pretty central person in my life, Claire's voice wavered slightly with vulnerability. I thought maybe you'd be willing. Of course. The answer came without hesitation. When? Next Thursday? I have a session at 6. You could come for the last 20 minutes or so. I'll be there. Claire's therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had an office in a converted house on the quiet side of Pine Ridge. The waiting room was deliberately calming, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a sound machine masking conversations from the inner office. Ethan arrived at 6:20 as instructed, his palms sweating despite the cool October evening. A door opened and Claire emerged, gesturing him inside. Doctor. Mitchell was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and an air of practiced calm that probably came from years of hearing people's worst moments. Ethan, thanks for coming, she said, shaking his hand. Claire's told me quite a bit about you. I thought it might be helpful to meet face to face. They settled into chairs, Ethan acutely aware that this woman knew things about him he'd never spoken aloud, filtered through Claire's perspective and therapeutic processing. I want to be clear, Dr. Mitchell said. This isn't an evaluation or a test. I'm not here to judge your relationship or give it my approval. I just like to understand the context of my clients' lives, especially when they're in significant relationships. Okay, Ethan said, unsure what else to contribute. Claire's been doing really important work around boundaries, self-worth, and recognizing healthy versus unhealthy relationship patterns. I'm sure she's mentioned some of this to you. She has. She's been really open about the process. Dr. Mitchell nodded. Good. That openness is part of her growth. One thing I've been curious about, and Claire, feel free to jump in if I'm overstepping, is how you both navigate the history. The connection to Ryan, the complicated origin story. Ethan glanced at Claire, who nodded encouragement. We talk about it, he said. Not obsessively, but we don't avoid it either. We both know it's there. We both know people will have opinions, but we're trying to build something separate from all that. And how's that working? Some days better than others. Ethan chose his words carefully. I worry sometimes that I'm just another chapter in her recovery story. Like once she's fully healed, she'll realize she doesn't actually need me. Claire's hand found his, squeezing hard. That's not... Ethan, I've never said anything to make you think that. I know, it's my issue, not yours. Actually, Doctor, Mitchell interjected gently, it's a pretty normal fear, especially for someone who's been isolated for as long as you have. The question is whether you're letting that fear drive your decisions. I don't think so, Ethan said. I mean, I'm here. I'm all in with Claire. But yeah, there's a part of me that's waiting for it to fall apart. Because everything else has, Dr. Mitchell observed. Your friendship with Ryan, your social circle, your previous attempts at connection. Your experience has taught you that things end badly. Pretty much. So being with Claire is an act of faith against your own experience. It wasn't a question. That takes real courage. Ethan hadn't thought of it that way, but hearing it spoken aloud, something shifted in his understanding. He was being brave. They both were. Choosing to build something new despite every reason to protect themselves from potential pain. The session wrapped up with Dr. Mitchell encouraging them both to keep communicating openly, to not let fear make their decisions, and to remember that healthy relationships could coexist with individual growth. Walking out into the cool evening, Ethan felt lighter somehow, as if having a professional witness to their relationship had validated it in ways he hadn't known he needed. "Thank you for doing that," Claire said as they reached their cars. "I know it was probably uncomfortable." "It was," Ethan admitted, "but also helpful. She's good." "She is. She's the reason I'm functional enough to be in a relationship at all." Claire leaned against her car. "What you said in there about worrying you're just part of my recovery, that's not true. You know that, right?" "I'm starting to." Ethan moved closer, bracketing her against the car with his arms. "But it helps to hear you say it. You're not a chapter in my recovery story. You're the beginning of something completely new." She reached up, cupping his face. "Something I'm choosing because I want it, not because I'm healing from something else." "Good," Ethan said, and kissed her with the kind of certainty that was still new enough to feel revolutionary. The following week brought the first real cold snap, temperatures dropping enough that the construction site became miserable by mid-afternoon. Ethan was framing a wall when Marcus approached, his expression suggesting something more than work chat. "Got a minute?" Marcus asked. They stepped away from the noise into the skeletal frame of what would eventually be someone's living room. Marcus pulled off his work gloves, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Jennifer told me," he said finally, "about Claire, about the history." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Okay. I'm not mad or anything. I get why you didn't say anything, but I wanted you to know that I know and that I'm not judging." Marcus paused. "Actually, that's not true. I am judging. I'm judging that you're both adults who can make your own choices, and that whatever happened between her and her ex-husband isn't your responsibility to carry." "That's unexpectedly evolved of you," Ethan said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Jennifer's been educating me. Apparently I have opinions about things I don't understand." Marcus grinned. "But seriously, you seem happy. Happier than I've seen you in the 4 years I've known you. That counts for something." "I am happy," Ethan admitted. "Also terrified, but mostly happy." "That's how it should be. If you're not at least a little scared, you're not invested enough." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Just know that if you need time off for relationship stuff, or if things get complicated with the ex, I've got your back." "Thanks, Marcus, really." "Don't mention it. Now get back to work before I regret being supportive." That evening, Ethan told Claire about the conversation. They were at her apartment, Claire grading papers at the dining table, while Ethan attempted to study for an upcoming exam in his Introduction to Architectural History class. The domesticity of it still struck him sometimes, the way they could exist in parallel focus, doing separate things but together. "I'm glad Marcus knows," Claire said, setting down her red pen. The secret-keeping was starting to feel exhausting. Are you worried about word spreading, small-town dynamics being what they are?" "A little, but also let it spread. We're not doing anything wrong." She stood, moved to where Ethan sat on the couch. "We're two people who found each other and decided to see where it goes. That's normal. That's allowed." "Even given the history?" "Especially given the history." Claire sat beside him, tucking her legs under her. "Ryan doesn't own me. He doesn't own my future or get to dictate who I'm allowed to care about, and he definitely doesn't own you, friendship or not." "He's going to find out eventually," Ethan said. "And when he does, we'll deal with it." Claire's voice was firm. "Together, like we've been dealing with everything else." November arrived with the first significant snowfall. Ethan's classes ramped up in difficulty as the semester approached finals, and he found himself spending long evenings studying concepts that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. Claire helped where she could, quizzing him on architectural terms and movements, making flashcards with the same patient attention she brought to her third graders. "You're good at this," Ethan observed one night as she tested him on the characteristics of Gothic architecture. "I'm a teacher. Making information stick is literally my job." But she was pleased by the compliment. "Besides, I like learning new things, even if it's secondhand through your coursework." They'd fallen into a rhythm of weeknight study sessions at her apartment and weekend adventures when weather permitted. One Saturday, they drove to a neighboring town's farmer's market, bundled against the cold, sampling local honey and fresh bread and pretending to be the kind of couple who did things like this regularly. It felt aspirational and real all at once, play acting at normalcy until it became actual normalcy. "I want you to meet someone," Claire said as they loaded their purchases into her car. "My friend Rachel. She's been bugging me for weeks to introduce you." "The one from college?" "Yeah. She teaches at the high school here. I've been putting her off because I wanted to keep you to myself for a while, but I think I'm ready to share now." Claire smiled. "If you're willing." "Of course. When? Next Friday?" She suggested dinner at that Thai place downtown. The dinner was simultaneously easier and harder than Ethan expected. Rachel was warm and funny, clearly protective of Claire, but willing to extend benefit of the doubt to Ethan. Over pad thai and spring rolls, the conversation flowed easily, touching on teaching, construction, the peculiarities of Pine Ridge's winter weather. "So Claire tells me you're going back to school," Rachel said, directing her attention to Ethan. "That's ambitious." "Or crazy," Ethan said. "The jury's still out." "No, it's brave." Rachel's expression turned serious. "Starting over takes guts, especially when you're already established in something else." "I wasn't really established," Ethan corrected. "I was just existing." "And now you're living," Rachel said, glancing at Claire with obvious meaning. "Good for both of you." After Rachel left, Claire and Ethan walked through downtown Pine Ridge, the streets quiet and cold, decorated for the approaching holidays. They passed storefronts and restaurants, their breath visible in the freezing air, hands linked inside Ethan's jacket pocket for warmth. "She liked you," Claire said. "I could tell." "How?" "Because she didn't grill you about your intentions or warn you about hurting me. Rachel's very protective. If she didn't approve, you'd have known." "But that's comforting, I think." Ethan pulled her closer as they walked. "It matters to you, having your friends accept this. Us." "It does," Claire admitted. "Not because I need permission, but because I want the people I care about to see what I see in you. I want them to understand why I chose this." "And what do you see in me?" "Honestly, someone who's been hurt but isn't bitter. Someone who isolated himself but still remembered how to connect when it mattered. Someone brave enough to try again even when it scared him." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "Someone worth taking a risk for." Ethan kissed her there on the cold sidewalk, not caring who might see, not caring about anything except the woman in his arms and the future they were building together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Claire was smiling. "Take me home," she said. "Our home." The casual possessive hit Ethan with unexpected force. Our home. Not hers, not his, but theirs. A shared space, shared life, shared future. It was still her apartment technically, but the sentiment was what mattered. That night, lying in Claire's bed with her curled against his side, Ethan allowed himself to really think about what was happening. In the span of 2 months, he'd gone from isolated and careful to connected and open. He'd applied to school, started building friendships again through Claire's social circle, begun imagining a future that included partnership instead of just solitude. It was terrifying. It was also exhilarating. "What are you thinking about?" Claire murmured, half asleep against his chest. "How much has changed? How different everything feels." "Good different or scary different?" "Both." Ethan ran his fingers through her hair, the gesture now familiar and soothing to them both. "Mostly good, though." "Good." She pressed a kiss to his chest, already drifting back towards sleep. "Because I'm not done changing things yet." "What do you mean?" "Shh. Sleep. Tell you tomorrow." But tomorrow came, and Claire seemed to have forgotten, or changed her mind about sharing whatever she'd meant. The week proceeded normally. Work, classes, time together, the building blocks of a life that was starting to feel sustainable rather than temporary. Then on Thursday evening, as they were cooking dinner together in her kitchen, Claire brought up something that shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving," she said, stirring vegetables in a pan. "About where we want to be, who we want to spend it with." "Okay," Ethan said carefully. He hadn't given much thought to the holiday, had spent the last several years treating it like any other Thursday, deliberately avoiding the family dynamics he'd left behind. "My parents usually host. They're in Montana now, retired near my dad's brother. They've been asking me to visit, and they know I'm seeing someone. She glanced at him. They want to meet you. Ethan's hand stilled on the cutting board. Meeting parents. The classic relationship milestone, weighted with significance and expectation. That's a big step. It is. And I'm not pushing if you're not ready. We could do separate holidays this year, or I could go alone and you could meet them later, or we could just skip the whole thing and have Thanksgiving here. Claire turned off the burner, gave him her full attention. But I want you to know the invitation is there. They're curious about the person who's made me happy. What have you told them? About the history? The basics. That we knew each other peripherally before, that we reconnected through a mutual friend's setup, that the situation is complicated, but we're handling it. She paused. My mom knows about Ryan, obviously. She knows everything that happened. She's just glad I'm moving forward. And your sister? Ethan had to ask, even though the topic was fraught. Claire's expression tightened. My parents don't speak to her either. What she did, they couldn't get past it, so you wouldn't have to worry about running into her. That must be hard for them, losing a daughter. They made their choice. I didn't ask them to cut her off, but I also didn't ask them not to. Claire's voice was matter of fact. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. They understood that. Ethan considered the invitation. Meeting Claire's parents meant declaring this relationship serious, permanent enough to warrant family introduction. It meant stepping fully into the future they were building instead of keeping one foot in the escape route. Okay, he said. Let's do it. I'd like to meet them. Claire's smile was brilliant. Yeah? Yeah, I'm terrified, but yeah. They're gonna love you, Claire said with absolute certainty, moving into his arms. Because I love you, and they trust my judgment now in ways they didn't before. The words hung in the air between them, significant and new. I love you. They'd been building toward it, dancing around it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way nothing else had. Say that again, Ethan said quietly. I love you. Claire looked up at him, no hesitation in her expression. I love you, Ethan Cole, completely, messily, without reservation. I love you too. The words came easily, naturally, like he'd been holding them back for weeks and they'd finally found their moment. I think I have since that first hike, watching you talk about not shrinking anymore. They kissed with the kind of intensity that made dinner forgotten, made everything forgotten except the reality of what they were declaring to each other. This wasn't casual anymore. This wasn't experimental or cautious. This was real, committed, the kind of love that changed everything. Later, after dinner was reheated and eaten, after they'd moved to the couch and talked through logistics for Montana, after the immediate intensity had settled into something warm and sustained, Ethan felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. This was what he'd been missing during his isolation. Not just connection, but this specific connection with this specific person who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. What are you smiling about? Claire asked, her head in his lap while he absently played with her hair. Just happy, Ethan said simply. Really, genuinely happy. Good. Me too. The weeks before Thanksgiving passed quickly. Ethan finished his semester strong, grades better than he dared hope. The acceptance that he could actually do this, that returning to school wasn't a foolish dream, but an achievable goal, settled into his bones alongside the love he felt for Claire. They drove to Montana the day before Thanksgiving, the trip taking most of the day through mountain passes and high plains. Claire's parents lived in a small town outside Missoula, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody and newcomers were noted with interest. They're going to ask a lot of questions, Claire warned as they pulled into her parents' driveway. My dad especially. He's protective. I can handle protective, Ethan said, though his heart was racing. Claire's parents, Thomas and Linda Dawson, were warm but assessing, welcoming Ethan into their home with the kind of hospitality that came naturally, but didn't preclude judgment. Over the course of the evening, Thomas asked pointed questions about Ethan's work, his education, his intentions regarding Claire. Linda was gentler but no less thorough, her questions probing emotional territory rather than practical. Claire seems different, Linda said during a quiet moment while Thomas and Claire were in the kitchen preparing coffee. Lighter. More herself than she's been in years. She's amazing, Ethan said honestly. Strong and clear and brave in ways I'm still learning from. She told us about the therapy, about all the work she's done. Linda's eyes were kind but serious. She also told us about Ryan, about what really happened in that marriage. I'm glad she's moving forward, but I hope you understand, we're cautious. We don't want to see her hurt again. Neither do I, Ethan said firmly. I love your daughter. I'm not perfect and I'm figuring things out as I go, but I love her and I want to build something good with her. That's all we can ask, Linda smiled. And for what it's worth, I think you're good for each other. You both have that look, like you've found something you didn't know you were missing. Thanksgiving dinner was warm and full of laughter, the kind of family gathering Ethan had forgotten existed. Stories were shared, gentle teasing exchanged, and through it all, Claire's hand found his under the table, grounding and reassuring. This is nice, Claire whispered during a lull in conversation. Having you here, making new memories. Yeah, Ethan agreed. It really is. The drive back to Pine Ridge felt different. They'd crossed a threshold, made declarations to each other and to Claire's family, stepped fully into the reality of their relationship. There was no going back now, no pretending this was casual or temporary. And Ethan found he didn't want to go back. For the first time in years, the future looked bright instead of threatening, full of possibility instead of pitfalls. Whatever came next, Ryan finding out, the complications, the continued building of this life they were creating, they'd face it together. As they crossed back into Pine Ridge late Sunday night, the mountains familiar and welcoming in the darkness, Ethan reached over and took Claire's hand. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For choosing me. For making me believe I was worth choosing. Claire squeezed his hand, didn't let go. Thank you for being brave enough to let me. They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing words weren't always necessary, that presence was sometimes enough. And when they finally reached Claire's apartment, climbing the stairs together to the space that had become theirs, Ethan felt something he'd thought was lost forever. He felt home. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Ethan was measuring lumber at the construction site. An unknown number, which he normally ignored, but something made him answer. Ethan Cole? The voice was familiar in the worst possible way. Ryan. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. Around him, the construction site continued its noise. Saws, hammers, voices calling measurements. He walked toward his truck, seeking relative quiet. Been a while, Ryan said, and there was something in his tone that set Ethan's teeth on edge. Not friendly, not angry, something calculating. 4 years. Ethan leaned against his truck bed, forcing his voice to remain neutral. What do you want? Heard some interesting things lately. Thought we should talk. Ethan's stomach dropped. About what? About you and my ex-wife. The words came out hard, accusatory. Yeah. Didn't think I'd find out, did you? How? Does it matter? Ryan's laugh was bitter. Small town, Ethan. Someone saw you two at that Italian place. Someone else mentioned you hiking together. It doesn't take a genius to put it together. Ethan closed his eyes, mentally cursing their own naivety. Of course they'd been seen. Of course word had traveled. They'd known this was coming, but knowing and experiencing were different animals. We were going to tell you, Ethan said, aware of how weak it sounded. When? After the wedding? Ryan's voice rose. Jesus Christ, Ethan, of all the women in the world you had to go after Claire? My Claire. She's not yours anymore. You made sure of that when you slept with her sister. The silence that followed was sharp and dangerous. When Ryan spoke again, his voice had gone cold. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what our marriage was like. I know enough. Ethan straightened, anger replacing the initial shock. I know you betrayed her in the worst possible way and then spent months trying to make it her fault. I know I told you we were done 4 years ago, which means I don't owe you explanations about my personal life. This isn't just your personal life. This is... Ryan stopped, seemed to be controlling himself. I need to see you. We need to talk about this face to face. There's nothing to talk about. Like hell there isn't. Ryan's voice shook with barely contained rage. You were my best friend. We had history, loyalty. And you throw that away for what? For her? You threw away that friendship yourself, Ethan said quietly. The minute you asked me to condone what you did. I'm not doing this with you, Ryan. Not over the phone, not in person, not ever. Fine. Then I'll talk to Claire directly. I'm sure she'll have interesting things to say. Don't. The word came out harder than Ethan intended. Leave her alone. Whatever you have to say it to me. Protective already? That's touching. Ryan's laugh was ugly. Tell you what, I'm in town tonight. Meeting me at Murphy's bar at 7. If you don't show, I go to Claire's apartment. Your choice. The line went dead. Ethan stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, rage and fear warring in his chest. Murphy's was a dive on the edge of town, the kind of place where construction workers went after shifts and conversations sometimes ended in parking lot confrontations. Ryan knew that. He was choosing the location deliberately, trying to intimidate or provoke. Ethan texted Claire immediately. Ryan knows, he called me, wants to meet tonight. Her response came within seconds. Are you okay? Yeah, just angry. He threatened to come to your place if I didn't meet him. Don't go. He's bluffing. Maybe, but I'm not taking that chance. I'll handle it. Not alone you won't. Where and when? Ethan hesitated, then told her. Claire's response was immediate and non-negotiable. I'll be there. Don't argue. He tried anyway, calling her directly. She answered on the first ring. Absolutely not, Ethan said before she could speak. This is between me and Ryan. You don't need to be there. Wrong. Claire's voice was steady, final. This involves both of us. We said no hiding. Remember? No apologies. That means we face this together. Claire, he's angry. I don't know how he's going to react. I don't care. I'm not letting you walk into that alone, and I'm not hiding from him anymore. She paused. I spent 3 years shrinking myself, making myself smaller, hoping that would somehow make my marriage work. I'm done shrinking, Ethan. For anyone. The steel in her voice made arguing impossible. Okay, Ethan said finally. Together. But we go in my truck, we stay together, and if things get ugly, we leave. Agreed? Agreed. Pick me up at 6:30? I'll be there. The rest of the workday crawled by. Marcus noticed Ethan's distraction but didn't comment, probably assuming it was normal relationship nerves. If only. Ethan left at 5, went home and showered, changing into clean jeans and a heavy flannel shirt. Not armor exactly, but the closest thing he had to it. Claire was waiting outside her apartment building when he pulled up, dressed in dark jeans and a jacket, her face set in determined lines. She got in the truck without speaking, reached over and squeezed his hand once, then settled back in her seat. You okay? Ethan asked as he pulled back onto the road. Terrified, Claire admitted, but also really, really angry. I've been thinking about this all afternoon, about how he still thinks he gets a say in my life, gets to approve or disapprove of my choices, and She stopped, visibly controlling herself. I'm done with that. I'm done with him having any power over me. He doesn't, not unless you give it to him. I know, but knowing and feeling are different things. She looked at him. Thank you for letting me come. I know you wanted to protect me. Always, Ethan said simply, but I also respect that this is your fight too. Murphy's bar was exactly as unpleasant as Ethan remembered. Dim lighting, stale beer smell, scattered tables occupied by men drinking away the day's frustrations. Ryan was already there, sitting at a corner table nursing what looked like whiskey. He'd changed in 4 years, gotten thicker around the middle, lines around his eyes that suggested more bitterness than laughter. When he saw them walk in together, his face went dark. Ethan felt Claire's hand slip into his, a brief squeeze before she released it and walked toward Ryan's table with her spine straight and her shoulders back. Ethan followed, positioning himself slightly between them out of instinct. So it's true, Ryan said without preamble, eyes fixed on Claire. You're actually doing this. Hello, Ryan. Claire's voice was cool, polite, empty of emotion. It's been a while. Don't. Ryan's hand tightened on his glass. Don't do the distant stranger thing with me. We were married for 6 years. Were, Claire emphasized. Past tense. We've been divorced for 4 years. What I do with my life stopped being your business when you signed those papers. And you? Ryan turned his attention to Ethan. My best friend. The guy who was supposed to have my back. You really looked at every woman available and decided on my ex-wife? I didn't decide anything, Ethan said, keeping his voice level. We ran into each other, started talking, realized we connected. It wasn't planned and it wasn't meant to hurt you. Bullshit. Ryan stood, and Ethan instinctively moved closer to Claire. You knew exactly what you were doing, both of you. This is revenge, plain and simple. Revenge for what? Claire's voice cut through, sharp and clear. For you cheating on me with my sister? For you destroying our marriage and then blaming me for not being enough? For you spreading lies about why we split up? Which part should I be seeking revenge for, Ryan? I apologized for that, multiple times. You sent drunken texts saying you were sorry while in the same breath explaining why it was partially my fault. Claire's composure didn't waver. That's not an apology. That's more manipulation. Ryan's jaw worked, rage and something that might have been shame fighting for dominance. You've got her well trained, he said to Ethan. Bet she's told you all about what a monster I am. Bet you ate it up, the chance to be her hero. She doesn't need a hero, Ethan said quietly. She's doing fine on her own. I'm just lucky she lets me be part of her life. How noble. Ryan took a step closer. You think you know her? You think a few weeks of whatever this is means you understand what she's really like? Stop. Claire moved forward, putting herself between them. This isn't about Ethan. This is about you not being able to accept that I've moved on, that I'm happy, that my life doesn't revolve around your feelings anymore. Happy? Ryan's laugh was cruel. You think you're going to be happy with him? He's a construction worker, Claire. No ambition, no future. You're settling. That's enough. Ethan's voice dropped to something dangerous. You don't get to talk about her that way. You don't get to talk about either of us. Or what? Ryan stepped around Claire, getting in Ethan's face. You'll fight me. Go ahead. Show her what kind of man you really are. The bar had gone quiet around them, other patrons watching with the particular interest people showed when violence seemed imminent. Ethan could feel his heart pounding, adrenaline making his hands shake. It would be easy to push back to let 4 years of anger find physical outlet, but that was what Ryan wanted. Drama, chaos, proof that they were all still caught in the same toxic patterns. No, Ethan said, stepping back. I'm not doing this with you. We're leaving. That's right. Run away, just like you did 4 years ago. Ryan's voice followed them. You were always good at that, weren't you? Disappearing when things got hard. Ethan kept walking, Claire's hand in his, heading for the door. Behind them, Ryan's voice got louder. She's using you, you know. I know her. She's probably been planning this, found out you were back in town and saw an opportunity to make me look bad. She's vindictive like that. Claire stopped. Ethan felt it in the sudden tension of her hand, the way her whole body went rigid. He turned to see her face, saw something there that made him step back instinctively, giving her space. She turned slowly, deliberately, and walked back toward Ryan's table. Ethan followed, every instinct screaming that this was a mistake, but trusting her enough to let her handle it. You want to know what I'm doing? Claire's voice was quiet, but it cut through the bar's resumed noise like a blade. I'm choosing to be with someone who respects me, who listens when I talk, who doesn't need me to be smaller so he can feel bigger. That's not revenge, Ryan. That's self-respect. Self-respect, Ryan repeated mockingly. Is that what you call sleeping with your ex-husband's best friend? We haven't slept together, Claire said calmly. Not that it's any of your business, but since you seem determined to make assumptions, let me be crystal clear. What Ethan and I have is based on actual connection, actual compatibility, actual mutual respect. All things you and I never had, even in the beginning. Ryan's face flushed dark. That's rewriting history. We were good together. We were terrible together. I just didn't have the courage to admit it until you forced my hand. Claire leaned forward slightly. But here's the thing, Ryan. I'm grateful for that now. Because if you hadn't blown up our marriage, I'd probably still be there, slowly dying inside, convincing myself that this was as good as it gets. So thank you. Sincerely. Thank you for being such a spectacular failure as a husband that you made leaving the only option. The slap came fast, Ryan's hand moving before anyone could react. It caught Claire across the face, the sound sharp and shocking in the sudden silence. Ethan moved on pure instinct, putting himself between them, his hands shoving Ryan back hard enough that he stumbled. Touch her again, and I'll break your jaw, Ethan said, his voice absolutely calm, absolutely certain. We're done here. You stay away from both of us. You don't call, you don't text, you don't show up anywhere we are. This is finished. You can't tell me. I can, and I am. Ethan kept his body between Ryan and Claire, aware of her behind him, one hand touching her reddening cheek. You hit her. That ends any remaining courtesy. Stay away from us or I call the police and file assault charges. Your choice. Ryan seemed to deflate slightly, the rage draining out of him, leaving something smaller and more pathetic. She made me... No. Claire's voice came from behind Ethan, steady despite the mark blooming on her face. I didn't make you do anything. You chose to hit me, just like you chose to cheat, just like you chose to lie. Those are your choices. Your failures. I don't own any of that anymore. She took Ethan's hand, squeezed once, then walked toward the door. Ethan followed, keeping his body angled so he could see Ryan, not trusting him not to try something else. But Ryan just stood there, surrounded by watching strangers, looking suddenly lost. Outside, the cold air hit like a slap of its own. Claire walked to the truck, got in, and sat very still. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine for warmth, but didn't pull out of the parking lot. Instead, he turned to look at her. Are you okay? He asked quietly. No. The word came out shaky. But I will be. We should document this, take pictures, file a report. I know. Claire turned to face him, and he could see her cheek was already swelling. Will you take me to the police station? Of course. Right now? Right now, before I lose my nerve. She reached up, touched her face gingerly. I never fought back before. When he got angry, when things escalated, I just took it, made myself small and waited for it to pass. Ethan felt ice in his veins. He hit you before? During your marriage? Twice. Both times he apologized, cried, swore it would never happen again. Claire's voice was distant, clinical. I believed him. Or I told myself I did. And then tonight, when he did it again, I realized something. He hasn't changed. He's exactly who he always was. But I have changed, and I'm not taking it anymore. Good. Ethan reached over, took her free hand. You're right, you have changed, and you're incredibly brave. I don't feel brave. I feel angry and shaky and like I might throw up. She squeezed his hand. But I also feel clear, like everything that's been muddy for years just came into focus. The police station was quiet, the night shift just starting. A female officer took Claire's statement, photographed her injuries, and explained the process for filing assault charges. Through it all, Claire remained calm and articulate, detailing not just tonight but the two previous incidents during her marriage. Ethan sat nearby, close enough for support but giving her space to speak for herself. We'll issue a restraining order, the officer said when Claire finished, and the district attorney will review for charges. Given that this is the third incident and there are witnesses to tonight, I'd say charges are likely. What happens if he violates the restraining order? Claire asked. He gets arrested, immediate jail time, no questions. The officer's expression was kind but firm. You did the right thing coming in. A lot of people don't. I should have years ago, Claire said quietly. You're here now. That's what matters. They left the station near midnight. Ethan drove Claire back to her apartment, walked her to her door despite her protests that she was fine. I'm staying, he said when she tried to argue. On your couch, in the guest room, wherever. But I'm not leaving you alone tonight. Ethan, please. He touched her face gently, careful of the bruise. Let me do this. Let me be here. Claire studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. Thank you. Inside, she went to change while Ethan made tea. Neither of them wanted, but both needed something to do with their hands. When Claire emerged in sleep clothes, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, the bruise looked worse somehow, angry and dark against her pale skin. They sat on her couch, tea cooling between them, processing the night in silence. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally. For what? For him hitting you, for not seeing it coming, for not stopping it faster. Ethan, Claire turned to face him fully. You have nothing to apologize for. You defended me. You got between us. You made sure we left safely, and then you supported me through filing the report. That's not failure. That's exactly what I needed. I should have hit him back. He deserved it. Maybe, But you chose the right response instead of the satisfying one. She smiled slightly. That takes more strength. They fell silent again. Outside, Pine Ridge slept, oblivious to the small drama that had played out in Murphy's bar. Ethan thought about Ryan's face when he'd hit Claire, the rage and entitlement there. He thought about the officer's careful documentation, the way she'd asked Claire about previous incidents. He thought about how many times this must happen, in how many different ways, how many people stayed silent. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "For what? Getting hit? For fighting back? For not minimizing it or making excuses for him? For doing the hard thing instead of the easy thing?" Claire leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you there." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." They stayed like that for a long time, finding comfort in presence rather than words. Eventually, Claire dozed off, her breathing evening out into sleep. Ethan eased her down onto the couch, covered her with a blanket, and settled into the nearby chair to keep watch. He didn't sleep much. His mind kept replaying the night, the confrontation, Ryan's hand moving toward Claire's face. The rage he'd felt in that moment had been white-hot and absolute, years of controlled emotion breaking free. He'd wanted to hurt Ryan, badly. The fact that he'd chosen not to felt simultaneously like strength and cowardice. But Claire was right. The satisfying response wasn't always the right one. They'd done what needed doing, documented the assault, filed charges, gotten a restraining order, legal remedies instead of physical ones, adult responses instead of teenage impulses. When dawn light began filtering through the windows, Ethan finally dozed off, exhaustion overriding adrenaline. He woke to Claire moving around the kitchen, making coffee with careful, quiet movements. "Morning," she said when she saw him awake. "How'd you sleep?" "Not much, you?" "On and off." She poured him coffee, brought it over. In daylight, the bruise on her face looked even worse, purple and yellow spreading across her cheekbone. "I called in sick to work, told them I had a minor accident. My principal knows the real story, though. I texted her this morning." "How'd she react?" "Supportive. Offered to help however she could." Claire sat down, cradling her own mug. "I also texted Jennifer. Let her know what happened. She's furious, wants to come over, but I asked her to give me space for now." "Do you want me to leave? Give you time alone?" "No." The word was immediate, certain. "I want you here, if that's okay." "It's more than okay." They spent the day in her apartment, accomplishing nothing productive, just being together. Claire alternated between periods of quiet reflection and sudden bursts of talking, processing out loud what had happened, what it meant, what came next. Ethan listened, offered what comfort he could, and tried not to think too much about his own roiling emotions. By evening, when the restraining order was officially filed and Claire's phone buzzed with the notification, something shifted. The immediate crisis was over. The legal machinery was in motion. What remained was figuring out how to move forward. "I don't regret it," Claire said suddenly. "Us. This. Even with everything that happened last night, I don't regret choosing you." "I don't regret it either," Ethan said. "But I'm sorry it cost you this. The confrontation, the violence." "It didn't cost me anything," Claire corrected. "Ryan chose violence. That's on him, not us. Our only crime was being honest about our feelings." She stood, crossed to where he sat, and kissed him gently, careful of her swollen face. "I'm not letting him take this from me. From us. He's taken enough." Ethan pulled her closer, mindful of her injuries but needing the contact. "So what now?" "Now we keep going. We're open about being together. We don't hide, and we don't apologize." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "And we trust that the right people will understand, and the wrong people don't matter." "What about work? People are going to talk." "Let them talk. I'll handle my school, you'll handle your construction site. We're both adults with lives outside other people's opinions." She smiled, and despite the bruise, despite everything, it was genuine. "I'm tired of living my life based on what other people think I should do. I did that for years with Ryan. It nearly destroyed me. I'm not doing it again." "Okay?" Ethan felt something settle in his chest, a decision made. "Then we do this our way. Honestly, openly, together." "Together," Claire agreed. Night fell again, the second since Ryan had called. Ethan stayed again, this time in Claire's bed, both of them needing the closeness even if nothing physical happened beyond holding each other through the dark hours. They talked in whispers about small things, about future plans, about what kind of life they wanted to build. "I'm thinking about going back to school," Ethan said as Claire's breathing was starting to slow towards sleep. "For architecture. It would take time, money I don't really have, but you were right. It's what I actually want." "I'll help you," Claire murmured. "Research programs, applications, financial aid, whatever you need." "You don't have to." "I want to. Partners support each other's dreams." She shifted closer. "That's how this works when it's healthy." Ethan absorbed that. Partners. The word felt significant, a commitment without formal declaration. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that's how it works." As Claire drifted into sleep, Ethan lay awake thinking about everything that had changed in just a few weeks. He'd gone from isolated and controlled to connected and vulnerable, from avoiding his past to confronting it directly, from existing to actually living. The cost had been high. A friendship finally, definitively ended, violence and police reports and restraining orders. But the gain felt immeasurable. He had Claire, brave and strong, and choosing him every day. He had possibility again, dreams that felt achievable rather than impossible. He had a future that looked nothing like the careful, colorless existence he'd constructed. Outside, Pine Ridge slept under winter stars, the mountains standing eternal watch. Inside, Ethan held the woman who'd accidentally walked back into his life and deliberately chosen to stay. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely at all. It felt full, rich with unspoken promises and shared understanding, the particular peace that came from knowing you'd survived the storm and chosen to keep building anyway. The weeks that followed the confrontation settled into something Ethan could only describe as deliberately normal. Claire returned to teaching with a carefully applied concealer hiding the worst of the bruise, fielding concerned questions from coworkers with practiced deflection. Ethan went back to the construction site, where Marcus had somehow heard rumors but had the good sense not to press for details. They both understood they were in a liminal space, waiting for the other shoe to drop while trying to build something stable on unstable ground. The district attorney's office called Claire on a Thursday to inform her that Ryan was being charged with misdemeanor assault. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. When she told Ethan that evening, sitting at her kitchen table with legal documents spread between them, her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. "Are you scared?" he asked, covering one of her trembling hands with his own. "Terrified," she admitted. "Not of him exactly. The restraining order is working. He hasn't tried to contact me. But of having to sit in a courtroom and tell strangers what happened. Of his lawyer trying to make me look like I provoked it. Of all the ways this could go wrong. It won't go wrong. There were witnesses. The bartender gave a statement. The officer who took your report believed you." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "And I'll be there. Every minute of it." "You don't have to eat." "I want to." He met her eyes directly. "We're in this together, remember? That means the hard parts, too." Claire nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Okay, together." They'd been saying that word a lot lately. Together. It had become a touchstone, a reminder of the choice they'd both made to stop facing things alone. Ethan found himself using it in his internal monologue, testing decisions against whether they honored the partnership he was building with Claire. It was strange and uncomfortable and also deeply comforting, this accountability to someone else's well-being alongside his own. The following Saturday, they drove to the city 2 hours away where Ethan had found a community college with an architecture program. Claire had insisted on coming, had spent hours the previous week helping him research options, organize transcripts from his scattered education, and draft a personal statement that explained the gap years without dwelling in them. "This feels presumptuous," Ethan said as they walked across the campus, past buildings that housed dreams he'd abandoned years ago, like I'm counting on something that might not happen. "You're exploring possibilities," Claire corrected. "That's not presumptuous. That's smart." She linked her arm through his, the gesture now familiar and grounding. "And even if you decide not to apply, you'll know. You won't spend the next decade wondering what if." The admissions office was helpful in that professionally encouraging way that suggested they'd seen every variation of non-traditional student. The counselor who met with them explained transfer credits, financial aid, the part-time program designed for working adults. Ethan listened and took notes and tried not to let hope take root too firmly. You have good foundational coursework, the counselor said, reviewing his old transcripts. The gap isn't ideal, but your work experience in construction actually strengthens your application. You understand building from the ground up, literally. That's valuable perspective. So you think I'd have a chance? Ethan asked. I think you'd have a very good chance, especially for the spring semester. We have rolling admissions. The counselor smiled. The question isn't whether you could get in. It's whether you're ready to commit. On the drive home, Ethan was quiet, processing. Claire let the silence sit, understanding that some things needed to be worked through internally before they could be spoken aloud. I want to do it, Ethan said finally as the mountains came back into view. I'm scared, and it's going to be hard, but I want to try. Then you should, Claire said simply. I believe in you. Those 4 words hit Ethan harder than they should have. When was the last time someone had said that to him and meant it? When was the last time he'd believed it himself? He reached over, took Claire's hand, and held on. The application went in the following week. Ethan told Marcus he might be cutting back hours if he got accepted, bracing for resistance. Instead, Marcus had grinned and said the company would work with him, that they needed people who understood both the practical and theoretical sides of building. Another surprise, another piece of evidence that the world wasn't as hostile to change as Ethan had convinced himself it was. November bled into December. The mountains wore snow like familiar clothing, and Pine Ridge transformed into the kind of picturesque winter town that appeared on greeting cards. Ethan and Claire fell into rhythms that felt less like dating and more like building a life. She graded papers at his apartment while he cooked simple dinners. He helped her hang Christmas lights on her balcony, even though neither of them was particularly festive. They hiked on weekends when weather permitted, stayed in when it didn't, learning each other's quiet habits and preferences. I've been thinking, Claire said one evening as they sat on her couch, a nature documentary playing unwatched on the television. About what happens after the court date. What do you mean? I mean, right now we're kind of in holding pattern, waiting for that to resolve before we make any big decisions. But after, assuming it goes the way it should, what then? Ethan considered the question. What do you want? I want to stop feeling like we're temporary, like this is just a response to trauma or rebellion or whatever people probably think it is. She shifted to face him more directly. I want us to be real and permanent and not defined by Ryan at all. We are real, Ethan said. We've been real from that first coffee. I know, but I want to feel that way completely. Without the shadow of the assault case, without wondering if he's going to violate the restraining order, without any of that. She paused. I want to just be with you, cleanly, moving forward instead of constantly processing the past. That sounds good, Ethan said quietly. Really good. So maybe after the court date we do something. Take a trip or, I don't know, something that's just about us, not about reacting to him. Where would you want to go? Claire smiled. Anywhere? Nowhere? Doesn't matter as long as we're choosing it for ourselves. They started planning hypothetically, looking at maps and travel websites with no real destination in mind, just enjoying the exercise of imagining a future uncomplicated by legal proceedings and restraining orders. It felt rebelliously optimistic, planning joy while still mired in the consequences of someone else's violence. The acceptance letter from the community college arrived 3 days before the court date. Ethan stared at it for a full minute before calling Claire, his hands actually shaking as he held the paper. I got in, he said when she answered. Spring semester. They're offering some financial aid. I got in. Claire's squeal of delight made him laugh despite his nerves. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. I haven't done anything yet, just got accepted. You applied. You chose to try. That's everything, Ethan. He could hear the smile in her voice. We're celebrating. Tonight. Dinner. Somewhere nice. We have the court thing in 3 days. Maybe we should... Nope. We're celebrating your good news because you deserve to have good things acknowledged, not pushed aside because of bad things pending. Her tone was firm. Pick me up at 7. Ethan agreed, hung up, and sat holding the acceptance letter like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. Architecture, school, a future that looked different from the one he'd resigned himself to. It felt enormous and terrifying and possible all at once. That night, At a restaurant nicer than anywhere they'd been before, Claire raised her wine glass in a toast. To new beginnings, to courage, to choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. That's very philosophical, Ethan said, smiling. I'm feeling philosophical. It's a special occasion. She clinked her glass against his. You're going to be amazing at this. Architecture. Creating spaces for people to live. It suits you.
You don't know that. I might fail out in the first semester. You won't, but even if you did, you'd have tried, and that's what matters. She set down her glass, reached across the table to take his hand. Can I tell you something I learned in therapy? Always. Failure isn't trying something and not succeeding. Failure is never trying because you're afraid of not succeeding. Everything else is just data. She squeezed his hand. You're collecting data now. That's not failure. That's living.
Ethan absorbed that, turned it over in his mind. You're very wise, you know that? I'm very in therapy, Claire corrected, laughing. It's not the same thing, but I'm learning, we both are. The court date arrived gray and cold, the kind of December morning that made Ethan grateful for the truck's heating system. He picked Claire up early, both of them dressed carefully in the kind of clothes that suggested respectability without trying too hard. Claire's hands were steady as she got into the truck, but her face was pale beneath carefully applied makeup. Ready? Ethan asked. No, but let's go anyway. The courthouse was in the county seat, a 30-minute drive through mountain passes dusted with new snow. They drove in silence, Claire's hand in Ethan's whenever he didn't need both hands for the road. The parking lot was nearly empty when they arrived, too early for their scheduled hearing, but neither had been able to stand waiting at home any longer. Inside the courthouse hummed with that particular bureaucratic energy of a place where life-altering decisions happened with procedural efficiency. They found the correct courtroom, sat on a bench in the hallway, and waited. Claire's lawyer arrived 20 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wen, who'd come highly recommended by Claire's therapist. How are you feeling? Patricia asked, sitting down beside Claire. Nauseous. Angry. Ready for it to be over. All normal. Patricia pulled out a folder, reviewed notes they'd gone over multiple times already. Remember, this is a preliminary hearing. The judge will review evidence, hear arguments, and decide if there's enough to proceed to trial. With the witness statements and photographic evidence, I'm confident we'll get the ruling we want. And if we don't, then we appeal. But let's not borrow trouble. Patricia looked at Ethan. You're the boyfriend? Yes, ma'am. Good. Your statement was helpful. Clear, factual, no emotional embellishment, exactly what we needed. She turned back to Claire. He might be here with his lawyer. If he is, you don't look at him. Don't react. Eyes on me or the judge, nowhere else. Understood? Claire nodded, her jaw tight. Ryan arrived 15 minutes before the hearing, accompanied by a lawyer in an expensive suit that suggested he'd invested significant resources in his defense. When he saw Claire and Ethan on the bench, his face went carefully blank, but Ethan caught the flash of anger before the mask settled into place. They didn't acknowledge each other, three people who'd once been central to each other's lives now existing as legal adversaries in a courthouse hallway. The bailiff called them in. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan had expected, almost intimate in its dimensions. They took seats behind Patricia while Ryan and his lawyer sat on the opposite side. The judge entered, an older woman with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every variety of human failure and wasn't impressed by any of it. The hearing proceeded with efficient formality. Patricia presented the police report, photographs of Claire's injuries, witness statements from the bartender and two patrons who'd seen the assault. Ryan's lawyer argued that it had been a single moment of lost control in a highly emotional situation, that Ryan had no prior criminal record, that this was out of character. Your Honor, Patricia countered, this was not an isolated incident. Ms. Dawson has provided testimony about two previous assaults during their marriage, a pattern of violence that escalated when the victim refused to accept Mr. Harper's attempts to control her personal life post-divorce. The judge listened impassively, reviewing documents. When she finally spoke, her voice was crisp and clear. Mr. Harper, I've reviewed the evidence presented and I find sufficient cause to proceed. You're ordered to continue observing the restraining order, to complete an anger management program, and to refrain from any contact with Ms. Dawson. The case will proceed to trial unless you wish to accept a plea agreement. Ryan's lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Ryan's face went red, but he nodded curtly. "We'll accept a plea, Your Honor," the lawyer said. "Then we'll schedule allocution for 2 weeks from today. Ms. Dawson, you'll have the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement if you choose." The judge's eyes moved to Claire. "I want to commend you for coming forward. Too many people don't."
"Thank you, Your Honor," Claire managed, her voice surprisingly steady.
Outside the courtroom, after the paperwork was signed and the next date scheduled, Claire stood in the hallway and breathed like she'd been underwater for hours. Ethan put his arm around her, feeling the tremors running through her frame. "You did it," he said quietly. "It's done." Not quite. Still the sentencing hearing. But she was smiling, shaky and exhausted, but genuine. "But the hard part is over." He admitted guilt. He has to do the programs, keep the restraining order. "I won."
"Yeah, you did," Patricia agreed, joining them. "And for what it's worth, that was one of the cleaner resolutions I've seen. He knew he couldn't win at trial, not with the evidence we had. Smart of him to take the plea." They thanked Patricia, scheduled the follow-up for the sentencing hearing, and walked out into cold December sunshine. In the parking lot, Claire stopped, turned to face Ethan, and kissed him with more intensity than she'd shown since the night of the assault. "Thank you," she said when they separated, "for being here, for all of it." "Always," Ethan said simply. They drove home through mountains that seemed less oppressive now, as if the weight Claire had been carrying had lightened enough for the landscape itself to respond. She dozed against the window, exhaustion finally claiming her, and Ethan drove carefully, protective of her rest. That evening, curled together on Claire's couch, they pulled out the travel websites again. This time it wasn't hypothetical. They booked a cabin in the Smoky Mountains for the week after Christmas, a place with no internet and minimal cell service, just them and quiet, and the space to be without constant vigilance. "This feels extravagant," Claire said, reviewing the reservation details. "It's necessary," Ethan corrected. "We've earned some peace." The weeks before the trip passed in a blur of work and Christmas obligations, and the final sentencing hearing where Ryan received probation, community service, mandatory counseling, and the continuation of the restraining order. Claire read her victim impact statement with a steady voice, detailing not just the physical assault but the years of emotional manipulation and control. The way she'd been made to feel small and wrong and insufficient. Ryan had looked at the floor through all of it, his lawyer's hand on his arm like a physical restraint. When it was over and the judge dismissed them, Ethan watched Ryan leave through a different exit, his former best friend looking diminished and angry and utterly alone. Ethan felt nothing. No triumph, no sympathy, just a clean severance of something that had needed cutting for years. "How do you feel?" he asked Claire as they left the courthouse for what they both hoped was the last time. "Free," she said simply. "Finally, completely free." The cabin in the Smokies was exactly what they needed. Rustic but comfortable, perched on a hillside with views of mountains that made Pine Ridge's peaks look like practice hills. They spent the week hiking, cooking simple meals, reading by the fireplace, making love with the kind of unhurried attention that comes from having nowhere else to be and nothing else demanding their focus. On New Year's Eve, they sat on the cabin's porch wrapped in blankets, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. No fireworks, no parties, just the quiet transition from one year to the next. "I want to tell you something," Claire said as midnight approached, "and I don't want you to feel pressured to say it back." Ethan's heart rate picked up. "Okay. I love you." The words came out clear and certain. "I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe at that first coffee, maybe on the hiking trail, maybe watching you stand up to Ryan. But somewhere in all of this, I fell completely in love with you." Ethan felt something unlock in his chest, a final barrier he hadn't even known he was maintaining. "I love you too," he said, and the words felt like truth, like commitment, like a future he could actually believe in. "I think I have for a while. I was just too scared to say it." "Are you still scared?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But I'm saying it anyway. I love you, Claire Dawson, completely, messily, without reservation." She kissed him as the year changed over, midnight arriving unmarked except by their presence together. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing in equal measure.
They returned to Pine Ridge in early January to a town that felt both familiar and new. Marcus greeted Ethan with knowing looks but didn't pry. Jennifer hugged Claire and whispered congratulations. The gossip network had processed their relationship and moved on to newer scandals, relegating Ethan and Claire to old news. Spring semester started in late January. Ethan cut his construction hours to part-time, spending 3 evenings a week in classrooms learning the theory behind what he'd been doing physically for years. It was hard, humbling to be the oldest student in most classes, struggling with concepts that came easily to the 18-year-olds around him. But Claire was there, helping him study, celebrating small victories, reminding him why he'd chosen this path. "You got a 92 on your design fundamentals midterm," she announced one evening, having apparently checked his online grades before he'd had the chance. "That's an A." "It's a 92, Ethan corrected, but he was smiling. "Which is an A. Accept the victory, Mr. Almost Architect." By March, the rhythm of their lives had settled into something that felt permanent rather than provisional. Claire's lease was coming up for renewal, and one evening, as they cooked dinner together in her kitchen that had become their kitchen, Ethan made a decision. "Move in with me," he said, not looking at her, focused on chopping vegetables with excessive precision. "Or I'll move in here. Or we find a new place together. But let's stop pretending we don't essentially live together already." Claire set down the spoon she'd been using to stir sauce. "Are you serious?" "Completely." He finally looked at her. "I love you. You love me. We spend almost every night together anyway. Why maintain 2 apartments?" "Because it's fast. Because people will have opinions. Because it's a big step." "It is," Ethan agreed. "And I'm asking anyway. What do you think?" Claire studied his face for a long moment. "I think my apartment is nicer than yours." "It definitely is. And I think I'd like to wake up with you every morning without having to coordinate whose place we're staying at." She smiled. "So yes, let's do it. You move in here." The logistics took a few weeks. Ethan gave notice on his apartment, packed up his minimal belongings, and moved them into Claire's space that was already fuller and more lived in than anywhere he'd inhabited in years. She made room in closets and drawers with the kind of grace that suggested she'd been mentally preparing for this, wanting it as much as he did. The first morning waking up in what was now their shared bedroom, Ethan lay still for a moment, absorbing the reality. Claire's arm across his chest, her breathing deep and even, the morning light filtering through curtains they'd picked out together. This was home, not a place to hide, not a temporary shelter, but an actual home built with someone he loved who loved him back. "You're thinking too loud," Claire murmured, not opening her eyes. "Sorry, just processing." "Process quieter. It's Saturday." But she was smiling, pressing closer. They spent the morning lazy and unhurried, making breakfast together, reading the news on their phones, existing in the kind of comfortable silence that comes from knowing each other's rhythms. When Ethan's phone buzzed with a message, he almost ignored it, but something made him check. It was from Ryan, a simple text that violated the restraining order by its very existence. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're happy." Ethan stared at it for a moment, feeling nothing but a distant echo of old anger. He showed it to Claire. "Are you going to respond?" she asked. "No." He deleted the message, blocked the number. "He's not part of our lives anymore, not even enough to acknowledge." "Good." Claire took his phone, set it aside, and pulled him closer. "Because we have better things to do than give him space in our heads." Later that day, Ethan called the police to report the restraining order violation. The officer who took the report was professional and thorough. Ryan would get a warning, possibly court time if he violated again. Ethan didn't care about the outcome particularly. He just wanted the boundary maintained, the separation clear. Spring unfolded into early summer. Ethan finished his first semester with grades that surprised him, proof that he could do this, that the dream wasn't as far-fetched as he'd convinced himself. Claire finished her school year with the kind of exhausted satisfaction teachers feel when they've successfully shepherded 30 children through 10 months of growth. They hiked the trails around Pine Ridge, now familiar and beloved. They cooked dinners and argued mildly about whose turn it was to do dishes. They made love and made plans and made a life that felt earned rather than accidental. On a Saturday in June, exactly 8 months after that first coffee shop meeting, Ethan and Claire drove out to a viewpoint they'd discovered on one of their early hikes. The valley spread below them, Pine Ridge a small cluster in the distance, mountains rising on all sides in layers of green and gray and blue.
I want to build something here someday, Ethan said, looking out over the landscape. Not here specifically, but something in these mountains, a house that works with the terrain instead of fighting it. Something thoughtful and beautiful and functional. You will, Claire said with absolute certainty. And I'll be there to help you design the kitchen. Just the kitchen? Fine, the whole house. But especially the kitchen. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Can you believe where we are, compared to 8 months ago? No, Ethan admitted. 8 months ago I was barely existing. And now you're living, Claire finished. We both are. They stood there, two people who'd found each other through accident and choice, and the particular courage it took to try again after being broken. The mountains watched, indifferent and eternal, while at their feet Ethan and Claire built something small and significant and entirely their own. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. For what? For walking into that coffee shop, for staying when you could have run, for choosing me every day since. Thank you for being worth choosing, Claire replied, for being honest and kind and brave enough to let me in. They kissed as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting everything in gold and amber light. Below them, Pine Ridge prepared for evening. Above them, the sky stretched infinite and clear. And between them, in the space they'd carved out through honesty and effort and love, there was only peace. The future spread ahead, unknowable and full of possibility. Ethan's education, Claire's career, the house he'd build someday in these mountains, the life they'd continue constructing together piece by careful piece. There would be challenges, complications, moments when the past tried to reassert itself, but they'd face it together with the particular strength that comes from knowing you've already survived the worst and chosen to keep building anyway. As they walked back down the trail toward the truck, hands linked, the evening settling cool and gentle around them, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just contentment, not just relief, but genuine happiness. The kind that came from being fully present, fully known, fully committed to another person who was equally committed to you. I love you, he said, not for the first time, but feeling it new each time he spoke it aloud. I love you too, Claire replied, squeezing his hand. Now and for as long as you'll have me. Forever then, Ethan said, and meant it with every part of himself that had been broken and had learned to heal. They drove home through the mountain evening, toward the apartment they shared, toward the ordinary evening they'd spend together, toward the future they were building one choice at a time. The past was behind them, acknowledged but no longer controlling. The present was theirs, earned through honesty and courage and the willingness to try again. And the silence between them as the truck climbed through the darkening mountains wasn't empty at all. It was full of understanding, of partnership, of the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly who you're supposed to be with, building exactly the kind of life that matters most. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, but real and earned and completely, wonderfully theirs.